Alright, hi everyone, Josh Hughes here from Attitudes Entertainment Company, Team Kaizen and Ingenium. And today we're going to quickly run through the different jobs that you can get in the game industry and a basic rundown of what goes into making a game pitch and like how much it costs to make a game. There's our team logo. So the first thing you need to realize is that when you see a video game on a store shelf, you're seeing the product of time and money. On average, it takes about 2 years, maybe a little bit more to make a game, and anywhere from $20 to $60 million to make a AAA game. And so let's say you have a really awesome idea for a game and you give it to a publisher like PlayStation, Xbox, Activision, whoever. They're not going to hand you 20 to 60 million dollars and say, "See you in 2 years, hope it works out." They're going to hand you a tiny chunk of money and say, "Okay, in a month we want 2 characters and a level working." This is called the milestone system. So once you meet that milestone and get those 2 characters in a level working, the next tiny chunk of money will be handed to you and the next milestone will be set. So over the course of that 2 years, you're constantly meeting deadlines. If you're in high school, a great class to take that can simulate this is either newspaper or yearbook, because they're constantly having to meet deadlines every 30 days. And that can kind of give you an idea of what it's like to constantly be under that kind of pressure and kind of build that behavior for it. And how you meet those deadlines is through teamwork. So we're going to talk about the different team members. The first one is the game designer. They're kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. They know a tiny bit of everyone else's job, so they can work with everyone and guide everyone to make sure that the end game comes off as this expression of a single person, even though anywhere from dozens to potentially even hundreds of people worked on it. The next person is the story writer. If you want to be an effective story writer in video games, I highly recommend you experience storytelling in all its forms. Go to plays, listen to old radio dramas, read books, read manga and anime, watch movies, including outside of genres that you typically like. Because the more you can pull from different kinds of storytelling, the more you can impact your audience. Keep in mind that some of the most effective and popular stories in video games lately, including The Last of Us and BioShock, actually took their inspirations for their stories from outside of games. Next up, we have business plan writing. By the time you hit about freshman year in high school, you already know the math that's necessary to write a business plan. You just have to show that you know how much money you need to get the game done, and you know how you're going to spend it and when. So that way that they are assured that they're not just going to hand you money and you're going to go turn around and buy 40 jet skis with it. Show that you actually have a plan of how to spend it on the wages for your employees, the state and federal fees and taxes involved, how much money you need to keep the lights on in the building, so on and so forth. Now we're on to our first kind of artist, concept art. People always get confused on concept art because they'll go buy a collector's edition of a game and it comes with an art book and they're like, "Oh, okay, now I have all the art that was ever made for this." No, you don't. You actually have the pieces of art that were accepted at the very end. You don't have the hundreds or thousands of pieces of art that were created beforehand, tweaked and tweaked over and over again until they arrived at that final art. So, for instance, when you draw a character for a video game, you should draw the character in the same pose like 10 or 12 times, each time with different hair, different clothes, different shoes, different weapons. And then you and your art team can sit down and go, "Okay, well, I like the sword of A, the shoes of B, the hairstyle of C," and that can help you narrow down the features you want for the final character. Once you get that final character, you draw them from the front and the side because that's important for the 3D artist later. Another quick note, if you want to be a 2D artist for games, I highly recommend take biology classes, because biology classes will help you bring more realism to your characters, both human and animal, and that is very important in selling the illusion to the player. So once we have that front and side view, we hand it off to a 3D artist. They take those front and side views into a 3D program called Maya or Blender or 3ds Max, and it looks like a 3D room inside their computer where they pull and stretch 3D clay until they have a statue of the character. That statue is just gray. It can't move or do anything yet, so we need to get more artists involved before it's a fully working game character. The next artist is a texture artist. They paint a 2D piece of digital paper and then wrap it around that statue, kind of like wrapping a present, and that gives the in-game model its outer coloring. So basically anything you see in a video game, including everything you're looking at right now in this video, actually is gray objects that have a thin piece of digital paper on them that give them their coloring. And that thin piece of digital paper was colored by a texture artist. Our next artist is kind of in between an artist and a technical person. They're called a rigger or a rigging artist. They go on the inside of the body of the character and build a skeleton. And then they say, okay, this chunk of arm flesh follows this chunk of this arm bone, so on and so forth. And the reason that's important is that when we animate the character, we're actually animating their skeleton, which in turn pulls their body along for the ride. It's just like how my and your bodies work. When we move, our muscles pull our skeleton the way we want to go, and that pulls our body with it. And game characters move around in the exact same fashion. So once we've done that, we're ready for animation. And there's two different kinds. The first kind of animation is lesser known by the general public, but it's actually the more widely used. That is called keyframing animation. So with keyframing animation, let's say that the character's fist at his waist is position 1 and his fist behind his back is position 2. Once the computer knows position 1 and 2, it can fill in all the missing frames of animation in between to give us that smooth animation back and forth. It's really easy to do because if you already have the computer where you can model your character, you're already in a position where you can do the animation because the computer is already powerful enough for it, and you don't need a big expensive set or anything to create animations. The other kind of animation is much more widely known and a little more expensive to do. That is mocapping. You put a person in a spandex suit, put them in a room surrounded by cameras, have them act out their motions, which are then recorded and transferred to a video game character. This kind of animation is very dynamic. It can get you very real, very human performances, but it can be costly. Some studios, such as Naughty Dog, use sound stages that can cost up to $1 million or more, and there is various levels of mocap you can do. Some are cheaper, but it's still a little more of an intensive process, and you still need to have keyframing animators on hand to fix any errors that may come up during the mocap process. Next up, we have programmers. Programmers take everyone else's work and put them inside what's called a game engine. The two most popular game engines out there are the Unreal Engine and the Unity 3D engine, and you can look them up online, and they're both free to download and to work with and learn in. And the programmers type code to make all these objects work together, primarily through what we call if and then statements, like if the player presses X, then Sackboy jumps. If the player tilts their stick, Sackboy runs in the direction they're tilting. And through these complex if and then statements, you can create the living, breathing game world that tricks your audience into thinking it's real. So it's a very technical process. It's very problem-solving oriented, but it's one of many jobs in this presentation that have what we call transferable job skills, meaning if you decide that you like games and you like this kind of work, but you don't want to work in the game industry, you can take your programming knowledge and go work in several other industries. Next up, we have audio. It's becoming massive in our industry on several different fronts. First of all, there's 3D positional audio, which is a new technological advancement where it's kind of like surround sound, but surround sound, if you think about it, is kind of like a donut around you. It lets you hear where something is around you in a circle. 3D positional audio is like a ball around you and lets you hear things above, below, around, and even how far away things are. That can make audio more realistic for people playing a virtual reality game, and if done correctly, can even set it up so that people who are blind can play 3D video games using the audio to figure out where they're at in the game world. So it can actually open up accessibility options for people. We also have Foley work, which is the act of making any non-human sound, like a slamming door, screeching car brakes, that kind of stuff. That has to be recorded and then turned into an audio file that can be used in the game. And then finally, we have composing music for video games. You have very famous composers like Nobuo Uematsu, who composes the Final Fantasy series, or Bear McCreary, who just composed the new God of War. They have to compose an entire suite of songs that can all work together inside the game world to help drive home the narrative. Next up, we have acting. It's a different beast than Hollywood. You won't get paid millions of dollars per project. You won't have a mansion with a private runway or anything like that. But you will get paid a decent middle-class wage, and you just have to keep in mind that you will have a very imagination-driven job here, because some days you'll be sent a script in the mail and you go stand in a foam room that is like a 4x4 room and you just read lines into a microphone and you have to deliver it as if you're there. Other days you'll be on a soundstage with your other actors in a spandex suit in a sword fight using those foam noodles from pools as your sword, but you have to deliver your lines as if you're in the fight of your life. So it's one of those things that if you have a really vivid imagination, this can be a really good avenue for you to pursue a career in, and it dovetails into other things too, like doing voice acting for animation or for commercials. Now we're on to the single most misunderstood job in our industry, QA, also known as quality analysis, also known as beta testing. People hear about it and go, oh my god, that's my dream job, I get to play games all day. Nothing is further from the truth. You go in at 8 a.m., your boss hands you a 2-minute section of a game, you play that 2-minute section over and over and over again until you break it. Then you have to break it again, record it, write a report about it, show the recording and the report to the boss, the programmer, and the artists involved, work with them to fix it, and then try to break it again. It's a really tedious and important job because you want people on your team breaking the game and fixing it before it gets in the hands of people who paid $60 for the privilege. But at the same time, most people who are doing QA, it's because they're either going to college or getting trained on something else in the game industry, and they're trying to get their foot in the door at a company so that once they're able to do a different job, they can just step over into that position and have some seniority at the company already. Next up is a job that first became important during the PlayStation 3 and 360 era, and that's community, because people don't just want to buy into or buy a video game anymore. They want to buy into a sense of belonging and an idea that there's people that can be their point people to help them out when they need it. So you need people on your team, even if you're a small team, that run public relations, focus groups, community management on social media, fan mail, support, and that is very, very important. And especially if you're doing community management for bigger jobs, for bigger companies, it can take you all around the world where you're going to all these different expos and representing the company. So if you're a very outgoing people person, this can be a very exciting job for you. Next up, we have marketing. Marketing is stylishly telling people that they need your product in their life, and one of the fastest ways to do that is through an elevator pitch. It's based on the fantasy idea of what if you got on an elevator with someone who had all the money and power in the world to make your dreams come true? What would you tell them in that 30-second elevator ride? Which that's built around the idea that the average human attention span's about 30 seconds. So the best way to do this is grab your favorite video games, books, or movies, flip them over and read that paragraph on the back, because that paragraph on the back is an elevator pitch. It doesn't tell you everything in 30 seconds because that's impossible, but it tells you enough to get you hooked and want to learn more past 30 seconds. That's the goal of an elevator pitch. Now we have legal. If you want to be a lawyer, there is a lot of need for you in the game industry. The field is called entertainment law, and you'll be working with studios to do things like, for instance, create what's called non-disclosure agreements. Whenever you join a studio, they have a lawyer draft an agreement called a non-disclosure agreement, and when you sign it, you're saying that you agree that anything secret you learn about the game, whether it's a secret about the story or about the technology used to make it, you're agreeing not to tell the public unless you're given permission to do so. And lawyers also help with copywriting the names of the games that you're working on or the characters, helping copyright technology, helping navigate any kind of legal proceedings necessary to do all that kind of stuff. And it's a very important full-time job. Actually, one of our friends is literally his full-time job is he's a lawyer for PlayStation. So it's one of those things that if you want to go into it, go to law school and go specialize in entertainment law. Next, we have human relations. Human relations is kind of like community management, except for instead of dealing with people outside your company, you're dealing with people exclusively inside your company. You're making sure they get paid on time, making sure they get their benefits. If there's a fight between two employees, you help mediate it out. So if you're people-oriented but you're not sure you want to work with people outside the company, human relations is a great job for you, and it's another one of those jobs that has transferable job skills because every company, regardless of industry, needs human relations. So the last slide today is branding. People always mix up branding and marketing. Like I said before, marketing is stylishly telling people that they need your product in their life. Branding is the immediate emotional response people get when they hear your name, see your logo, or whatever. So for instance, McDonald's marketing is, I'm loving it. Their branding is that immediate emotional response you get in your head when you see the golden arches, like yay, good food, you nasty food, whatever your connection is. And it used to be that only big companies had to worry about branding, but in this day and age when everyone everyone has their own Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram account, we have to worry about what's called personal branding, because how you represent yourself online can actually impact whether or not you're hireable. And I'll raise my hand, as a small game studio that's a startup, we do this, and bigger companies than us do it. When someone applies to join us, one of the first things we do is we look them up on social media, and we see how they treat people, because people have this weird thing in their head where, even though it's called social media and it's very obviously public, people act on there as if no one's. All right, so sorry, continuing from the break in the video there. So they act on social media in ways that they would act like when they're in the break room at our company or at an expo representing us or interacting with fans. And if they're being constructive and uplifting and willing to work on awesome stuff and willing to stand up for people, that generally puts them in a favorable light where you're like, you know what, we think we want to work with this person. On the other hand, if they're being abusive, using racist, misogynistic, or any kind of abusive language, that generally tells us that they're going to be terrible on our behalf, make us look bad, and hurt people. So it gets to the point where the toxicity outweighs the talent. And to drive this home, I'm friends with a programmer on Twitter named Krister Katila, and he actually put up a Twitter poll to people in the industry saying, if you could hire a programmer and you had a choice between the world's best programmer, but this person could not talk with people without being condescending and mean and rude, or an all-right programmer who has amazing people skills and is really kind and decent to people, who would you hire? Over 70% said that they'd rather hire the second person, because it just gets to a point where if a person is way too toxic, there's not really a lot you can do to make it worth having them around for their talent, because you're putting out fires more often than than problems are getting solved. They're too busy being abusive and hateful to people. So it's one of those things that realize it's okay to be who you are on social media, but realize any individual tweet, post, or video could be someone's first impression of you, and you want it to be a good first impression that shows you as someone who's willing to be a team player who acts in dignity and respect, and that will make them feel a lot more comfortable about bringing you onto their crew. So with that, thank you very much for watching the video today. I hope it was informative, and let me know if you have any questions.